For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. Every year, millions of people venture out on road trips, often traversing scenic routes in natural parks and undiscovered backcountry. But if you're in the middle of nowhere, in an unforgiving environment like the desert, and your vehicle breaks down, the results could be catastrophic. Click the subscribe and like buttons. This is Outdoor Disasters. The Sahara Desert is the world's largest hot desert and the third largest desert behind Antarctica and the Arctic. Located in North Africa, it covers large sections of the continent, covering 5 million square miles, which are comparable to the area of China or the United States. The Sahara is the hottest desert in the world, with one of the harshest climates. The average annual temperature is 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The area receives little rainfall, receiving less than 1 inch of rain every year. The Sahara is much more than just sand. In fact, the majority of the Sahara is made up of barren, rocky plateaus, as well as salt flats, mountains, and dry valleys. With very little water, food, and shelter, being stranded in this extreme environment is a worst-case scenario for anyone. For Emile Leray, being stranded in the Sahara would be a legendary story of survival. In 1993, French engineer Emile Leray embarked on a journey through the Moroccan Sahara Desert in his Citroen 2CV, a car that was well known for its durability. He was no stranger to the desert outside Morocco. He's done many African excursions and knew the area well. In March of 1993, 43-year-old Emile set off from Tantan on the Moroccan coast to Zagora. He left Tantan with the required reserves of fuel and provisions, as well as tools to keep his old 2CV on the road. At this time, the Western Sahara War, an armed struggle between the Sahrawi indigenous Polisario Front and Morocco, agreed to a ceasefire. With the Polisario ceasefire just 18 months old and frequently being broken at the small town of Tilimsaoun, the Moroccan army stopped Leray from continuing south towards Moussaid, the former Polisario front line. He was asked to take a soldier back to town. He did not want to get involved and wanted to continue his journey. Emile claims an insurance problem that does not allow him to take passengers, arguing that his 2CV is already very loaded and cumbersome. He knows full well that in Africa, it's looked down upon to not give soldiers rides, especially in the desert. He claims naivety and misunderstanding, playing the role of a tourist not familiar with local customs. Emile then is turned back towards Tantan under the disgruntled and disapproving look of the soldiers. He's afraid he will be followed, and he wanted to remain out of sight of soldiers. So he puts the pedal to the metal on his 2CV. His plan is to bypass the area and resume his original direction. After a few miles, he sees a track through the desert and believes this is a good area to deviate from the road and bypass the checkpoint. So Leray takes his Citroen 2CV and traverses on an uneven, rocky desert path. After some vigorous bouncing, his car strikes a big rock and comes to a stop. He gets out and takes a look at his car, and it was bad. A broken wheel arm. The car was totally damaged and immobile, and he was stranded in the Sahara Desert. Emile was about 25 miles from Tantan, which is possible to reach on foot, but he runs the risk of theft in the extremes of the desert. Emile Leray decided that he would not risk walking to the nearest town. "I could not have gone back on foot. It was too far," he said. Emile had many valuables and important equipment he did not want to leave alone. In the desert, nothing is permanently lost, especially for the ones who know where to look. He could not communicate with anyone as mobile phones did not exist then. He realized that he was in a precarious situation as he was many miles away from the nearest town. He also had little food and water. "I put myself in what one calls survival mode. I decided I will eat and drink less and monitor my supplies of water and food to make them last as long as possible," he says. Emile organizes his encampment around the broken 2CV and reflects on the situation. He had enough food and water to last for a few days, so makes a decision. From his wreck, he will build a two-wheeled machine. One by one, he carefully considered all the technical obstacles that this entails, and being a master of African bush mechanics, he believes he has all the tools and the elements to succeed in the task. He began to dismantle the 2CV, first removing the body, which he will use as a shelter against the cool nights and sandstorms. Having no long-sleeved shirts against the burning sun, he makes sleeves from a pair of socks. With what remains of the car, Emile Leray will try to build the motorcycle. The first night, he mentally reviewed all the stages and difficulties involved in this rather crazy project. When he woke up the next morning, it was time to go to work. He shortened the car's chassis and reattached the axle to two of the wheels. Repurposing the wheel arm, attaching it to part of the chassis, and slapping the engine in the middle. For thick pieces, he'll do it as Emile calls it, the African way. The piece of metal is folded to 90 degrees to form an edge. At a fixed point, this edge is weakened by a hacksaw or round file. The piece must be placed flat to perforate the file point with a hammer or a needle. He would bend them, drilling holes with metal bits until he could create guides for the screws he salvaged. It seems unthinkable to assemble this machine in the middle of the desert without the help of a drill and a welding station. But that didn't stop Leray. He was going to take on this audacious undertaking. The rest is only a matter of time, dependent on how long his provisions will last. Emile calculates it will take 3 days to build the bike. In reality, it will take longer. There was a great deal of uncertainty to carry out this project. The possibility of failure remained high. Stranded in the Sahara Desert, the likelihood of death was high. And if he did run into one of these desert thieves, what would they do to him? But Emile continues to work on, bending, sawing, screwing, sweating. But at last, his prototype was finished. The 2CV motorcycle was obviously not conceived for the sake of comfort or aesthetics. The exhaust is loose, so the nose and the ears are affected greatly by the engine's gases. The bike does not have a brake, nor does it have footrests, but he needed to brake and keep the bike balanced with his feet since the machine had poor stability. The first test ride nearly killed him, as the bike wanted to wheel stand all the time. Some tweaking managed to calm the thing down and limited the speed to around 20 kilometers per hour. Better than nothing. He was lucky he wasn't seriously injured. So back to the desert lab, he continued to work. The arrangement of the clutch and accelerator controls was particularly tedious, but was necessary to dismantle, adjust, and reassemble the parts for optimum operation, day after day, fall after fall. Emile continued to work on his machine, prolonging his stay in the desert, more than the 3 days expected. As Emile Leray wiped the sweat from his brow in the Sahara heat, he knew the clock was running out. The last of it, his water, reflected light in his eyes, a reminder that he'd better have success soon, or someone would come upon a strange sight, finding his corpse next to this desert oasis of madness. On the 12th day, Leray spent the day adjusting and testing, still hammering and bending away to get this machine right. The pressure was on. He had to get it right, or he risked dying of dehydration, a terrible way to die. So gets on the machine. He starts it up. He's lost count of how many test rides and failures he's had so far, and off he goes. He hasn't fallen. He has control. He has balance. "It works!" Emile yells. You can only imagine Emile grinning ear to ear as his creation is functional, riding in the middle of the desert with this Frankenstein creation he calls the desert camel. He quickly gathers his things. He also feels compelled to clean the bivouac site of a mad scientist. He barely had enough water left to make it back to civilization, but he'd done it. The bike was operational, and he was off. After a day of riding, Emile was picked up by the Moroccan police force, who took him to the nearest village. They handed him a big fine and impounded the desert camel because the registration documents for his car no longer corresponded to what he was driving. His car, bike monstrosity. He had to leave the camel for now. A month later, Emile made the 2,000-mile journey between Rennes and Tantan with another 2CV to pick up his motorcycle, now dismantled in 3 parts. Although his story appeared in brief on French television in the 1990s, Mr. Leray did not publicize his exploits, and they only recently emerged again after appearing on a motoring website. Mr. Leray, now much older, has kept the motorbike as a memento of his incredible escape from the Moroccan desert. The Desert Camel has enjoyed the honors of the press and participated in a few events. The camel still lives. The desert is a harsh environment. There's very little water, food, shelter, or even shade. It's a place where life is hard to come by. If you want to live long enough to see the sun rise again, then you need to prepare yourself for survival in the desert. If you ever find yourself in this worst-case scenario, there are a few key points to remember. Before any trip, be sure of the condition of your vehicle and handle the trip. Going into the desert with a car that can break down is asking for trouble. Stay with your vehicle. You've got a much better chance of being discovered by your car than alone in the desert. No matter how hot you get, keep your skin covered at all times. Your sweat will help keep your body cool. Use your mirrors to signal for help and make an SOS sign so a low-flying aircraft can see it. If you have to spend the night in the desert, create a fire using whatever resources you can find. Vital tips so you can survive an outdoor disaster.